Emily Hart had learned, over the years, how to live with silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind spoken of in books or whispered about by people who believed solitude was a luxury, but the heavy silence that settled into a home when too many words had gone unsaid for too long. It lived in the corners of her small London flat, clung to the pale walls and pressed against her chest every morning when she woke up before the alarm rang. She was 36 years old, an English woman born and raised in the outskirts of Manchester, now living in London because life had once promised more there. Or maybe she had promised herself more. The flat was modest, one bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a living room that doubled as a workspace. A second-hand sofa sat opposite a window that overlooked a busy street. Emily liked to watch people from that window, strangers moving with purpose, carrying bags, holding hands, laughing into phones. They all seemed to belong somewhere. She often wondered where she belonged now. Emily worked as an editor for a small publishing company. It was not the job she had dreamed of in her 20s when she believed she would become a novelist by 30 and a successful one by 35. Instead, she corrected other people's stories, fixing sentences, smoothing plots, and quietly mourning the stories she never finished herself. Every morning followed the same routine. She woke up at 6:30, even though work started at 9. She made tea, always tea, never coffee, and stood by the kitchen window while the kettle cooled. She ate toast without tasting it. She dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors that helped her disappear into crowds. The mirror in the hallway reflected a woman who looked older than she felt and younger than she expected. Fine lines had begun to settle around her eyes. Her brown hair, once thick and lively, now fell flat against her shoulders. Still, there was something strong in her face, a quiet resilience shaped by years of endurance. Emily had endured many things. Her mother's illness, for one. Cancer had come quietly, like a thief in the night, and taken her away when Emily was only 27. Her father had followed 2 years later, not by illness, but by grief. He had simply stopped trying. Then there was Daniel. Daniel had been her husband for 7 years. They met at university, two hopeful students with shared dreams and borrowed confidence. He had loved her ambition at first, encouraged her writing, told her she would be great. But as years passed and reality grew heavier, his support thinned. "You're always tired," he used to say. "You're always working. You're never really here." And maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't. Their marriage ended quietly, without shouting or broken plates. One evening, Daniel packed a bag and stood in the doorway, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't think I'm happy anymore," he said. Emily nodded because she wasn't sure she was either. That had been 4 years ago. Now, as she walked to the underground station each morning, Emily carried all of this with her, the losses, the regrets, the things she never said. London moved around her like a living creature, loud and impatient, while she remained careful and contained. At work, she was known as reliable, calm, invisible. "Emily, can you take a look at this manuscript?" her manager Sarah asked one afternoon, placing a thick stack of papers on her desk. Emily smiled politely. "Of course." The manuscript told the story of a woman who left everything behind to start a new life in a small coastal town. Emily read it slowly, marking errors, but something about it made her chest ache. The courage of fictional women seemed easier than her own. That evening, rain fell heavily, soaking the streets and blurring the city lights. Emily stayed late at the office, not because she had to, but because she had nowhere else to be. When she finally left, the underground was crowded. She stood pressed between strangers, breathing shallowly, her thoughts loud in her head. For a moment, panic rose unexpectedly, an old feeling she thought she had buried. She closed her eyes and reminded herself to breathe. At home, she changed into comfortable clothes and sat on the floor beside her bed. From a drawer, she took out an old notebook, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were unfinished stories, half-written dreams, and a version of herself she barely recognized. She turned to a blank page. For a long time, she did nothing. Then, slowly, she picked up a pen. She wrote, "I am still here." The words looked fragile, almost embarrassed to exist, but they were true. Emily did not know it yet, but this small act, the decision to write again, would quietly begin to change everything. Not quickly, not easily, but honestly. And honesty, she would soon learn, could be just as painful as silence.
Emily began writing again in the early hours of the morning. It was not a decision she made with confidence or excitement. There was no sudden inspiration, no dramatic moment of clarity. Instead, it started as a quiet habit, something small she did before the rest of the world woke up, before expectations had a chance to weigh her down. She woke at 5 now. The city outside was different at that hour, softer, kinder. The streets were still, and even the noise of distant traffic felt restrained, as if London itself was holding its breath. Emily liked that. It felt like a shared secret. She wrote at the small table by the window, wrapped in a cardigan, her tea growing cold beside her. At first, the words came slowly. She deleted more than she kept. Her hands trembled sometimes, not from cold, but from fear. Fear of failure, fear of hope, because hope had betrayed her before. The story she was writing was not about her, at least that was what she told herself. It was about a woman named Clara who returned to her childhood town after many years away. Still, Emily recognized herself in every sentence, the hesitation, the grief, the longing to belong again. Some mornings she stopped writing and stared out the window, tears unexpectedly filling her eyes. She did not always know why she was crying. Perhaps she was mourning the years she had spent surviving instead of living. At work, things remained unchanged. Manuscripts arrived, deadlines passed, polite conversations filled the hours. Yet something inside Emily had shifted. "You seem different lately," Sarah remarked one afternoon, leaning against Emily's desk. "Not bad different, just lighter." Emily hesitated. "I've started writing again." Sarah's eyes softened. "That's wonderful." The word wonderful felt too large, too generous. Emily nodded, unsure whether she deserved it. That evening, Daniel emailed her. She stared at his name on the screen for a long time before opening the message. "Hi, Emily. I hope you're well. I know this is unexpected, but I was wondering if you'd like to meet for coffee sometime. There are things I've been thinking about, things I should have said." Her chest tightened. 4 years, and now he wanted to talk? She closed the laptop without replying. The past had a way of resurfacing when she felt weakest or strongest. Emily wasn't sure which this was. That night, memories came uninvited. Their small wedding, the rented flat they once shared, the quiet evenings when they sat together but lived separately. She remembered how invisible she felt near the end, how she had shrunk herself to fit into his dissatisfaction. By midnight, she was awake and restless. She opened her notebook and wrote furiously, letting the emotions spill onto the page. Clara argued with a man she once loved. Words were said that Emily had never dared to speak aloud. "I needed you to stay," she wrote. "I needed you to see me." The next day, Emily finally replied to Daniel. "I don't know if meeting is a good idea," she typed, "but maybe it's time." They agreed on Saturday afternoon. The cafe was small and warm, tucked away on a quiet street. Emily arrived early, her heart racing. When Daniel walked in, older and thinner, something inside her loosened and tightened all at once. "Emily," he said softly. "Daniel." They sat across from each other, two people connected by history and distance. Conversation began carefully, work, weather, mutual acquaintances, until silence settled between them. "I wasn't fair to you," Daniel said finally. "I didn't know how to handle my own unhappiness, so I blamed you." Emily listened, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "I left because I felt small, like I was disappearing." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I see that now." There were no apologies that could rewrite the past, no words that could restore what was lost. But something important happened in that moment. Emily realized she no longer needed his validation. She stood to leave first. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said gently. As she walked away, she felt the weight she had carried for years begin, finally, to lift. That evening, she wrote again, not with anger, not with regret, but with acceptance. Spring arrived quietly, almost apologetically. Emily noticed it in small ways at first, the way sunlight lingered longer in the evenings, the sudden appearance of pale blossoms along the streets she walked every day. Change did not announce itself loudly. It rarely did. Her mornings remained devoted to writing, but the fear that once sat beside her at the table had begun to loosen its grip. The story of Clara grew deeper, heavier, and more honest. Emily allowed her to make mistakes, to doubt herself, to stay when leaving felt easier. For the first time in years, Emily finished something. It was only a short draft, rough and imperfect, but when she typed the final sentence, her hands rested on the keyboard in disbelief. She had not abandoned it. She had stayed. At work, she hesitated for days before sharing the manuscript with Sarah. "Just tell me if it's bad," Emily said, half smiling as she handed over the printed pages. Sarah read it over the weekend. On Monday morning, she stood in Emily's doorway, eyes shining. "This is not bad," she said. "This is real." The word echoed in Emily's chest. Real. Still, doubt followed her home that evening. Years of self-protection had taught her not to trust good moments. She sat on her bed, staring at the wall, when her phone buzzed. A message from her younger sister, Lucy. "I'm thinking of moving to London. Can I stay with you for a bit?" Family was complicated. Lucy was everything Emily wasn't: impulsive, loud, unafraid of taking up space. After their parents died, distance had grown between them, shaped by grief and misunderstanding. Emily hesitated. Then she typed, "Of course." Lucy arrived 2 weeks later with 2 suitcases and endless energy. The flat felt suddenly smaller, louder, alive. "You live like a ghost," Lucy said one evening, half joking, half concerned. Emily laughed softly. "I know." Living with someone again was an adjustment. Lucy left lights on, filled the kitchen with noise, asked questions Emily wasn't used to answering. "Are you happy?" Lucy asked one night, lying on the sofa. Emily considered the question carefully. "I'm learning," she said. One afternoon, Lucy found the notebook on the table. "Are you writing again?" she asked. Emily nodded. "I'm scared." "Good. That means it matters." Those words stayed with her. A week later, Sarah called Emily into her office. "There's a small publisher looking for new voices," she said. "I sent your manuscript." Emily's breath caught. "You did what?" "They want to talk." The meeting was scheduled for Friday. Emily barely slept the night before. She imagined rejection, polite smiles, the familiar disappointment. But when she sat across from the publisher, a woman not much older than herself, something felt different. "Your story feels lived in, painful, but hopeful. We'd like to work with you." The words landed slowly. Work with you. Walking home afterward, Emily cried openly on the street, not caring who saw her. The city did not judge her, it simply carried on. That night, she stood at the window and watched the lights flicker on across the buildings. For years, she had believed survival was enough. Now she was beginning to understand that staying with herself, with her truth, was an act of courage. And courage, she realized, did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like choosing to live. Part 4. The Cost of Becoming. Success did not arrive with celebration. There were no champagne bottles, no dramatic phone calls, no sudden transformation. Instead, it came quietly, wrapped in emails and meetings, in edits and deadlines. Emily learned quickly that becoming visible carried its own weight. The publisher wanted revisions, deeper revisions. "Be braver here," the editor said, pointing to a passage Emily had softened. "Don't protect the reader, tell the truth." Truth had always been expensive for Emily. She spent evenings rewriting scenes that mirrored her own life too closely for comfort. Each change felt like reopening a wound she thought had healed. Some nights, she sat at the kitchen table long after Lucy had gone to bed, her face in her hands, wondering if this was worth it. "Nothing worth doing is painless," Lucy said when she noticed the exhaustion. "You taught me that once." Emily didn't remember saying it. Maybe she had wanted to believe it. As the manuscript evolved, so did Emily. She began speaking more at meetings, expressing opinions she once swallowed. She cut her hair shorter, not as a symbol of rebirth, but as an act of practicality. She stopped apologizing for taking up time. Yet with growth came fear. What if she failed publicly? What if people read her story and saw too much of her in it? One afternoon, a letter arrived from her hometown. The return address belonged to an old neighbor. Her childhood home was being sold. The news unsettled her more than she expected. That house held every version of her: child, daughter, dreamer, mourner. She booked a train ticket without overthinking it. Returning felt like stepping into a paused memory. The streets were smaller than she remembered. The house stood quietly, its windows empty. Inside, dust and echoes greeted her. She walked through each room slowly, touching walls, opening drawers. In her old bedroom, she found a box of notebooks, her earliest writing. She sat on the floor and read them, smiling and aching at once. She had always been this person. She had just forgotten. On the train back to London, Emily understood something important. Becoming herself meant letting go of who she had been trying to be for others. The book moved closer to completion. The publication date was set. Anxiety returned in waves. Interviews were scheduled. Her name appeared in places she never expected. With every step forward, the old instinct to hide whispered at her. But she didn't. At the launch event, she stood at the podium, hands trembling, and spoke. "This story," she said, "is about staying when leaving feels easier." The applause felt distant, unreal. Later that night, alone again in her flat, Emily sat by the window and breathed deeply. She was proud, but pride, she learned, was quieter than fear. Still, it was enough. The weeks after the book's release passed in a strange blur. Emily's name existed outside of her now, on covers, in reviews, spoken by people who had never met her. Some praised the honesty of the story, others found it uncomfortable. She read every word, even the painful ones, until Lucy gently took her phone away one evening. "You don't owe strangers your wounds," she said. Emily smiled, tired but grateful. What surprised her most was not recognition, but connection. Emails arrived from women across the country, teachers, mothers, widows, daughters, each thanking her for putting into words what they had lived in silence. "I thought I was weak for staying. I thought I was broken for grieving so long. Your story made me feel less alone." Emily answered as many as she could. She did not offer advice. She simply listened. Listening, she learned, was its own kind of courage. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still mornings when doubt returned, when she stared at a blank page and felt small again. Success did not erase grief. It did not undo loneliness. But it gave her something quieter and stronger: permission. Permission to rest, permission to speak, permission to remain unfinished. Lucy eventually moved into her own place, leaving behind silence, but not the heavy kind. The flat felt fuller now, shaped by laughter that lingered even after it ended. One evening, Emily walked alone along the river. The water reflected the city lights, broken but beautiful. She stopped and leaned against the railing, breathing in the cold air. She thought of her parents, of Daniel, of the woman she had been when survival was the only goal. She had not escaped pain. She had learned to carry it honestly. Back home, she opened a new notebook. The first page was blank, unafraid. She did not write immediately. Instead, she sat quietly, present in her own life, aware of its weight and its worth. Then she began again, not because she needed to prove anything, not because someone was watching, but because she was still here, and this time she chose to stay.